You don't need to do anything here. You don't need to prepare yourself. You don't need to adjust your posture. You don't need to get your thoughts under control. You don't need to pray the right way. You don't need to find the right words. You don't need to feel anything specific. If you're tired, you don't need to fight it. If you're restless, you don't need to calm yourself down. Just stay. Right now, nothing is being asked of you. Not your attention, not your effort, not your faith. You are not being tested in this moment. You are not being evaluated. You are not expected to arrive as a better version of yourself. You made it to the end of this day. That alone matters. Let your body settle in whatever way it chooses. If it wants to move, let it move. If it wants to be still, let it be still. There is no correct position here. There is no correct way to rest. Take a breath. Not a deep one, not a controlled one, just the breath that happens on its own. If the breath feels uneven, let it be uneven. If it feels shallow, let it be shallow. If it feels heavy, let it be heavy. Nothing needs to be fixed. You don't need to replay the day. You don't need to make sense of what happened. You don't need to understand why things felt the way they did. The day is over. Whatever you didn't finish today does not need you anymore tonight. Whatever you said wrong does not need to be corrected right now. Whatever you didn't become can wait. You're allowed to stop carrying it. You're allowed to arrive here exactly as you are, without editing yourself, without explaining yourself, without cleaning anything up. If you feel empty, you're welcome here. If you feel overwhelmed, you're welcome here. If you feel numb, disconnected, or unsure why you even pressed play, you're still welcome here. There is no threshold you need to cross. You don't need to feel close to God to be here. You don't need to feel peaceful. You don't need to feel grateful. Peace is not the entry requirement. Stillness is not the price of admission. This space is not reserved for people who are doing well. It is open to you as you are right now. If your thoughts are racing, you don't need to slow them down. If your mind keeps returning to unfinished conversations or unresolved worries, you don't need to push them away. Let them come and go the way distant sounds come and go in the night. You don't need to follow them. You don't need to engage with them. Just notice that you are here. If your body feels heavy, let it be heavy. If your shoulders feel tight, you don't need to release them. If your chest feels tight, you don't need to open it. Nothing here requires improvement. You're not expected to relax. You're not expected to feel better by the end of this. There is no outcome waiting for you. This moment does not require strength. You don't need to believe anything right now. You don't need to trust anything right now. You don't need to understand anything right now. Even silence is enough. Even confusion is allowed. If all you can do is lie here and listen without understanding, that is enough. If all you can do is breathe and wait for the next breath, that is enough. If all you can do is stay, that is enough. You are not behind. You are not late. This moment was not meant to be reached any earlier than this. You didn't miss it. Nothing about you disqualifies you from being here. There is nothing you need to prove in this moment. Nothing you need to achieve. Nothing you need to hold together. You don't need to try to rest. You don't need to try to let go. Just allow yourself to be here without instructions, without direction, without effort. If your eyes want to close, let them close. If they want to stay open, that's fine too. There is no signal you need to send, no response you need to give. You are not required to speak, out loud or inside your mind. Say nothing. You are not required to move forward. Stay. Nothing needs to happen next. Stay. You don't need to carry anything further into this night. Whatever you've been holding all day does not need to come with you now. not the responsibility, not the expectation, not the version of yourself you tried to be. You can set it down. You don't need permission to do that. You don't need a reason. This moment does not require you to keep performing. You don't have to be useful right now. You don't have to be productive. You don't have to be strong for anyone. If you've been holding yourself together all day, you can stop doing that here. Nothing will fall apart if you loosen your grip. Nothing here depends on your effort. You don't need to explain what you're feeling. You don't need to label it. You don't need to justify why it feels heavy. Even if you don't understand your own tiredness, you don't need to solve it. Just let it be here. If there are thoughts that keep repeating, you don't need to silence them. You don't need to answer them either. Let them speak without response. You are not required to engage. There is no conversation you need to finish tonight. No decision you need to finalize. No plan you need to lock in. Tomorrow does not need you right now. You can give the future back. You can give the past back too. Whatever you regret, whatever you replay, whatever you wish you had done differently, you don't need to process it here. This space is not asking for reflection. It is not asking for clarity. It is not asking for growth. It is only asking that you stop carrying. If you feel guilty for resting, you don't need to correct that feeling. If you feel uneasy about letting go, you don't need to reassure yourself. Nothing bad happens when you stop trying for a moment. You are allowed to be unavailable. Unavailable to expectations. Unavailable to demands. Unavailable even to your own inner pressure. You don't have to keep watch. You don't have to stay alert. You don't have to stay ready. You can lower the guard without replacing it with anything else. If your mind keeps scanning for what might go wrong, you don't need to stop it. Just notice that you are not following it. You are here, and that is enough. You don't need to check whether you're doing this right. You don't need to monitor yourself. This is not an exercise. This is not a test. This is not preparation for something better. This is simply a place where you are allowed to stop. If your body feels tense, you don't need to release the tension. If your jaw is tight, you don't need to soften it. If your hands are clenched, you don't need to open them. Nothing here requires adjustment. You don't need to improve your state. You don't need to reach a calmer version of yourself. You don't need to become more peaceful. You are allowed to arrive exactly as you are and stay exactly as you are. If you're disappointed in yourself today, you don't need to resolve that. If you're disappointed in others, you don't need to forgive that right now. This moment is not asking for reconciliation. It is not asking for understanding. It is asking for release. Release does not mean letting go perfectly. Release does not mean everything disappears. Release simply means you stop holding it up for a moment. You let the weight rest somewhere else. You don't have to know where it goes. You don't have to send it anywhere. You just don't have to keep it in your hands. If your thoughts drift, let them drift. If they return, let them return. You are not failing by being quiet. You are not avoiding anything important. Nothing is being neglected here. This pause is allowed. Even if your life feels uncertain, even if your path feels unclear, even if nothing feels resolved, you can still rest. You don't need certainty to stop carrying. You don't need answers to put things down. If prayer feels too heavy tonight, you don't need to force it. If words feel distant, you don't need to reach for them. Silence is not absence here. It is allowed. You don't need to offer anything in exchange for rest. You don't need to promise to do better tomorrow. You don't need to make commitments. You don't need to be hopeful. This moment is not transactional. Nothing is being traded. You are not being measured. You can let the weight fall without worrying about who will pick it up. You are not responsible for holding everything together tonight. You are allowed to be held by the moment itself. So let it drop. Let it rest. You don't have to name what you're releasing. You don't have to feel lighter. You don't have to notice a change. Just stop carrying and stay. You don't need to move forward from here. You don't need to progress. You don't need to improve. You don't need to turn this moment into something useful. There is nowhere you need to go next. Staying is enough. You may notice a part of you that wants something to happen. A shift. A sign. A feeling that says, this is working. You don't need to follow that part. Nothing needs to change for you to stay. You're allowed to remain right here without direction, without momentum, without purpose. Staying does not mean waiting for something better. It simply means not leaving. If your mind asks, what am I supposed to do now? You don't need to answer it. There is no next step. There is no instruction coming. Just stay. If thoughts rise up, let them rise. If they fade, let them fade. You don't need to track them. You don't need to manage them. They can exist without requiring your participation. You are not responsible for keeping this moment active. You don't have to keep yourself present. Presence is already happening, even if it feels thin, even if it feels distant, even if it feels like nothing at all. Nothingness is allowed here. If your body feels still, you don't need to deepen the stillness. If your body shifts, you don't need to stop it. There is no ideal state to reach. You are not trying to arrive anywhere. Staying does not ask for attention. You don't need to focus on your breath. You don't need to anchor yourself. You don't need to ground anything. You are already here, and here is enough. If your thoughts begin to wander toward tomorrow, you don't need to pull them back. If they drift toward yesterday, you don't need to redirect them. They can come and go without pulling you with them. You are not required to chase clarity. You are not required to stay awake. You are not required to stay alert. You don't need to monitor whether you are drifting. Drifting is allowed. Staying does not mean holding yourself in place. It means letting yourself remain without effort. If sleep comes, let it come. If it doesn't, that's fine too. There is no goal attached to this moment. You are not supposed to reach rest. You are not supposed to fall asleep. You are not supposed to feel anything particular. You are simply allowed to stay. If you notice impatience, you don't need to correct it. If you notice boredom, you don't need to escape it. If you notice discomfort, you don't need to fix it. All of it can exist without pushing you away from this moment. Nothing here is fragile. Nothing here requires maintenance. You don't need to protect this space. It holds itself. You don't need to hold yourself together. You don't need to keep your thoughts aligned. You don't need to keep your emotions steady. This is not balance. This is not control. This is staying. You might feel the urge to make meaning of this time. You don't need to do that. You might feel the urge to turn this into prayer. You don't need to do that either. Prayer is not required for staying. Faith is not required for staying. Understanding is not required for staying. You can stay even if you feel disconnected. You can stay even if you feel unsure. You can stay even if you feel like you don't belong anywhere right now. Staying does not ask who you are. It does not ask where you've been. It does not ask what you believe. It only allows you to remain. If you notice your mind reaching for words, you don't need to supply them. Say nothing. If you notice your body wanting to settle further, you don't need to guide it. Do nothing. If you notice the urge to leave this moment, to distract yourself, to move on, you don't need to resist it. Just don't follow it. Stay. Staying is not effortful. It does not require discipline. It does not require intention. It is simply the absence of leaving. If everything feels quiet, you don't need to deepen the quiet. If everything feels noisy, you don't need to quiet it down. This moment can hold both. You're not interrupting anything by being here. You are not delaying anything important. Nothing is on pause because you stopped. Everything that needs to move will move without you pushing it. You don't need to carry the flow of your life right now. You can let it carry itself. You are allowed to be still without being fixed. You are allowed to be present without being aware. You are allowed to be here without knowing why. There is no lesson hidden in this moment. There is no message you are missing. There is no insight waiting at the end of this. This is not a path. It is a place where nothing is required of you. So stay, not because it will lead somewhere, not because it will make things better, but because you are already here, and that is enough. Stay. You don't need to ask for anything now. You don't need to reach upward. You don't need to gather yourself. You don't need to form a prayer. Nothing here requires permission. You are already held, not because you did something right, not because you said the right words, not because you stayed strong. You are held because you are here. You don't need to feel it for it to be true. You don't need to trust it. You don't need to understand it. Being held does not depend on your awareness. Even if you feel distant, even if you feel disconnected, even if you feel nothing at all, you are still held. You don't have to check whether it's happening. You don't have to lean into it. You don't have to cooperate. There is nothing fragile about this. It does not require your effort to continue. If your body feels heavy, it can rest in that heaviness. If your mind feels loose or unfocused, it can remain that way. Nothing needs to be gathered. Nothing needs to be centered. You are not slipping away from anything important. You are not being missed. This moment does not depend on your attention. You don't have to stay alert to remain held. You don't have to stay conscious to remain held. Even if sleep begins to come, nothing is lost. Nothing here needs you to stay awake. If the idea of God feels distant, you don't need to bring it closer. If the word feels heavy, you don't need to carry it. You don't have to imagine anything. You don't have to picture arms around you. You don't have to create a feeling of safety. Being held is not a sensation. It is not an emotion. It is not a thought you need to keep alive. It is simply what is happening whether you notice it or not. You don't need to deserve this moment. You don't need to be worthy enough. You don't need to have lived well today. Nothing about your past disqualifies you. Nothing about your doubts excludes you. Nothing about your weakness removes you from this. You're not being evaluated here. There is no scale. There is no standard. There is no measure. If you feel broken, you are still held. If you feel uncertain, you are still held. If you feel like you don't belong anywhere, you are still held. You don't need to make sense of that. You don't need to agree with it. You don't need to accept it fully. You can let it remain in the background without trying to bring it forward. Being held does not ask you to surrender. It does not ask you to soften. It does not ask you to open. It does not ask you to trust. It simply remains. You can let yourself rest without knowing what is holding you. You don't need to name it. You don't need to define it. You don't need to give it meaning. If your thoughts begin to slow, you don't need to follow them. If your thoughts continue to move, you don't need to stop them. This holding does not come and go with your state of mind. It is not affected by distraction. It is not weakened by doubt. It does not withdraw when you drift. You are not holding yourself together right now. You are not carrying your own weight. You don't have to support anything. You don't have to brace yourself. You don't have to stay ready. You can let your guard down without replacing it with control. Nothing here will collapse. Nothing will slip away. Nothing will demand your attention. You are allowed to be fully passive. You are allowed to be unaware. You are allowed to be quiet in every sense of the word. If your breath changes, it does not need to be guided. If your body settles deeper, it does not need to be noticed. Everything is allowed to continue without your involvement. You don't need to respond to what is holding you. You don't need to acknowledge it. You don't need to say thank you. This is not a transaction. Nothing is being exchanged. Nothing is being earned. You are simply being held without condition. If you feel resistance to that idea, you don't need to resolve it. If you feel comfort, you don't need to hold on to it. Both can pass through without changing what is happening. This holding does not tighten. It does not loosen. It does not shift with your emotions. It remains steady without effort. You don't need to stay present for it to stay. You don't need to remain here consciously. Even if you drift into sleep, you're still held. Even if your thoughts fade, you are still held. Even if this moment dissolves into rest, nothing is lost. There is nothing you need to do to remain safe in this space. There is nothing you need to say to remain here. Do nothing. Say nothing. Stay. You are already held. You don't need words anymore. Not now. Whatever needed to be said does not need to be said tonight. You don't need to explain yourself. Not to God. Not to anyone. Not even to yourself. Explanation belongs to the day. The night does not ask for language. You can let the words fall away without replacing them with silence on purpose. Silence does not need to be created. It arrives on its own when effort stops. You don't need to choose surrender. You don't need to decide to let go. You don't need to understand what surrender means. Surrender is not an action here. It is what happens when nothing else is required. You don't have to release everything. You don't have to empty yourself. You don't have to trust fully. You don't have to open your hands. You can remain exactly as you are and still let go without noticing it happen. There is no ceremony in this. No moment where you finally give in. No clear shift. No confirmation. Surrender without words does not announce itself. It does not arrive with relief. It does not arrive with peace. It simply happens quietly when you stop holding. You don't need to name what you're giving up. You don't need to identify what you're placing down. You don't need to organize what stays and what goes. You can let it blur. You can let it be unclear. The night does not require clarity. If you feel resistance, you don't need to soften it. If you feel fear, you don't need to calm it. If you feel doubt, you don't need to resolve it. All of it can exist without blocking surrender. Surrender does not depend on your agreement. It does not wait for consent. It does not need your cooperation. It happens beneath thought, beneath effort, beneath language. If you notice yourself trying to surrender correctly, you can stop trying. There is no correct form. There is no technique. There is no right posture of the heart. You don't need to mean anything. You don't need to intend anything. You don't need to commit to anything. This is not an exchange. You're not giving something up to receive something else. You are simply no longer holding what was never meant to be carried all the time. You don't need to feel lighter for surrender to be happening. You don't need to feel different. Nothing needs to change on the surface. Surrender is not visible. It does not show itself in your emotions. It does not show itself in your thoughts. It shows itself in the absence of effort. If your thoughts continue, that's fine. If your thoughts slow, that's fine too. Neither one interrupts what is happening beneath them. You don't need to monitor whether you're letting go. Monitoring is effort, and effort is not needed here. You don't need to watch yourself. You don't need to stay aware. You don't need to stay present. You can drift. You can fade. You can fall into the background of your own experience. Surrender does not require your attention. If prayer feels distant now, you don't need to bring it closer. If God feels quiet, you don't need to reach. If belief feels thin, you don't need to thicken it. Surrender without words does not rely on belief. It does not rely on feeling close. It does not rely on certainty. It relies on nothing at all. You're not failing by having no words. You are not missing the point. You are not doing less than you should. Words are not required to be received. Silence is not absence. It is simply what remains when nothing is being pushed forward. You don't need to ask to be taken care of. You don't need to say you give up. You don't need to say you trust. You don't need to say anything at all. If your body relaxes, you don't need to notice it. If your body stays tense, you don't need to change it. Both are held equally. Surrender does not ask for softness. It does not ask for openness. It does not ask for vulnerability. It asks for nothing. And because it asks for nothing, it can happen even now. Even here. Even like this. You don't need to arrive at the end of yourself. You don't need to be exhausted enough. You don't need to reach a breaking point. Surrender without words does not wait for collapse. It exists in the smallest pause, in the slightest easing. In the moment, you stop trying to be anywhere else. If you notice gaps between thoughts, you don't need to enter them. If you notice stillness, you don't need to deepen it. Everything can remain exactly as it is. Surrender does not improve the moment. It does not refine it. It does not complete it. It simply removes the pressure to hold it together. You don't need to understand what you're letting go of. You don't need to feel that it has left you. It is enough that you are no longer gripping it, even if just for this moment, even if you pick it up again later. This is not permanent. It does not need to be. Surrender without words is temporary, gentle, unforced. You can let the night take what it will without asking where it goes. You don't need to follow it. You don't need to watch it leave. You don't need to mark the moment. You can simply remain. Do nothing. Say nothing. Stay. There is nothing left to do now. Nothing left to release. Nothing left to surrender. Nothing left to understand. You don't need to hold yourself here. You don't need to stay on purpose. If sleep comes, you don't need to follow it. If sleep doesn't come, you don't need to wait for it. Both are allowed. This moment does not have an ending. It simply softens. You don't need to listen closely anymore. You don't need to stay aware of the words. The words can fade. They don't need to land. They don't need to be remembered. They don't need to finish their thought. You can drift without leaving. You can rest without going anywhere. Staying now is no longer something you do. It is simply what remains when everything else falls quiet. You don't need to stay present. Presence is already loosening. You don't need to stay conscious. Nothing is lost if you slip away. If your thoughts become blurry, let them blur. If they stop forming sentences, let them dissolve. You are not required to stay with the sound of this voice. You are not required to stay with your breath. You are not required to stay with anything at all. Rest does not need attention. It does not need permission. It does not need to be guided. Your body already knows how to rest. You don't need to help it. If your breathing changes, let it change. If your body shifts, let it shift. If it becomes completely still, that is fine too. Nothing here needs correction. You don't need to check whether you're asleep. You don't need to notice when the moment changes. There is no signal that marks the beginning of rest. It happens quietly, without announcement, without confirmation. You don't need to stay awake to receive anything. You don't need to stay awake to be safe. You don't need to stay awake to be held. Even if awareness fades, nothing withdraws, nothing leaves, nothing closes. This is not a doorway. It is not a transition. It is simply a softening into what is already here. If the edges of your thoughts disappear, you don't need to bring them back. If time loses its shape, you don't need to orient yourself. There is no place you need to arrive. There is no state you need to reach. Sleep is not a goal. Rest is not an achievement. They are allowed to come without effort, without invitation, without noticing. You don't need to stay still. You don't need to stay relaxed. You don't need to stay calm. Even restlessness can rest. Even noise can fade on its own. Even tension can loosen without instruction. You don't need to stay listening. The sound of this voice does not need you. It will continue whether you follow it or not. You don't need to stay here for the prayer to continue. You don't need to complete anything. There is nothing unfinished, nothing waiting, nothing incomplete. If this is the last sentence you hear, that is fine. If you hear many more, that is fine too. Nothing depends on it. You don't need to remember what was said. You don't need to carry anything from this moment into tomorrow. Tomorrow is not required now. The night does not ask for readiness. It does not ask for preparation. It does not ask for strength. It allows you to disappear into rest without explanation. You don't need to say good night. You don't need to say thank you. You don't need to say anything at all. Words are no longer needed. You can let them go. You can let awareness go with them. You are not leaving something behind. You are not missing anything important. You are simply resting in staying. And staying now does not require you. It holds itself. You don't need to hold on. Do nothing. Say nothing. Stay. Jetzt